Let's continue our study through the book of Romans. We're continuing Romans chapter 9, verse 19. But before we get to that, let's do a quick recap. Remember, Paul was talking to the Jews and the believers and reminding them about who the Jews were, that the Jews were called, that they were supposed to recognize who the Savior was, who Jesus was and is when the time of Jesus was coming because of all the prophecies that were foretold. And of course, let's talk about briefly that he reminded them about what faith is, and it's through faith that we are saved, right? Okay, so as we continue through the study, just remember that the works that we do is not what gets us into heaven. It is by faith in who Jesus is and what Jesus has done for us. That although we continue to try to do all sorts of different things, sacrifices, or try to do good, it's not really what gets us into heaven. And we read that, right? It's because we are still full of sin. Well, not full of sin, but we are still sinful, that we continue to do the things that are against God. And we will see some of that here. So let's continue. Verse 19. You will say to me then, why does he still find fault? For who has resisted his will? Now, don't we tend to blame God or ask him why is he condemning us, or why are we going through some sort of hardship, or basically why are we being blamed for, or why is he looking for some sort of wrong things among us? Why did he make me this way? I'm a good person, that kind of things. Because if we know who God is God, right? But let's continue, verse 20. But indeed, O man, who are you to reply against God? Will the thing formed say to him who formed it? Now, let's think about, he's putting a little spin here. Why have you made me like this? Does not the potter have power over the clay from the same lump to make one vessel for honor and another for dishonor? Now let's think about that for a second. Okay, so let's just say you're a potter, right? You're a clay molder. You've got that spinning thing, and you're molding the clay, and all of a sudden the clay decides to talk back at you and say, "Why are you making me into a vase? Why aren't you not making me into a bowl?" Isn't that really the problem that we have? Is that we don't understand why God created us except through his word, right? But why would we question why God made us? Is basically the statement here. But God can, of course, create you the way he wants to create you. And remember, also, the thing is that it's really up to him. He can pour judgment on someone, or he could be merciful onto you because he is God, right? So it's not because, someone is doing so much better than I am, that they're so much better and God has favored them over me. We still have the same faith in the same God, don't we? Okay, so continuing. 21. Does not the potter have power of the clay from the same lump to make one vessel for honor and another for dishonor? Basically, he could destroy one lump of clay, or he could redo another lump of clay if he chooses to, right? One lump of clay to be better than others, or one lump of clay to be sitting in the corner far, far away. But no, he makes everything equal the way that he wants, right? Verse 22. What if God, wanting to show his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath prepared for destruction? There's the question. What if God decides he's just going to throw judgment down to everyone, instead of saying, you go ahead and continue to disobey God? Because he could do that, right? He could just wipe everything out if he wants to. He created all things by the word that he spoke, and he has allowed everything to happen as they are. Of course, he's taken life away because he says, and there are those whose life were taken away because of judgment, because they completely disregarded what God had said. Think about those who touched the Ark of the Covenant. If you haven't, go back to the Old Testament and read that part. So God can do that, right? So he shows his power. He could take life as he will, or he could give life as he will. Remember, there's this part about much long suffering, right? So long suffering is a term for like a long patience, or a long period of time before wrath is actually poured out. And that's what he's doing. God is in this long suffering period, basically just continuing letting things happen because he's doing everything he can to have you turn to him for everything. For one, for repentance, for strength, for wisdom, for all good things that he could provide, and everything that he could provide for you. Let's continue. So remember, verse 23, and that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels of mercy, which he had prepared beforehand for glory. So he has prepared things beforehand. He also has prepared wrath beforehand. But one thing you really must know is that this earth was supposed to be a prison for the devil. I'll have to find that in the Bible, but we'll search for that. And the the lake of fire was only meant to be for the fallen angels. It wasn't was not supposed to be meant to go there. But because men decided to choose to disobey God and continue to choose to disobey God, that had to happen. All right. Let's continue. So we're in verse 24. Even us whom he called, not of the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles. Remember, there's the distinction between the Jews and the Gentiles. Anyone who is not a Jew is a Gentile. So basically, if you're not a Jew, you're a Gentile. Right? Okay. Verse 25. As he also says in Hosea, I will call them my people who were not my people, talking about the Gentiles, and her beloved who was not beloved. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people. There they shall be called sons of the living God. There have been many of prophecies given to the Jews. The Jews were the chosen people through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But remember, it was the faith that actually saves people. And it's not because Abraham's the father of this generation, but it's because of the belief that, remember, Abraham believed God and it was accounted to him as righteousness. Just the same with all of us. We believe God, we believe his word, we believe what Jesus did, that he died and that he rose again. It's accounted to us as righteousness. Now, when it came to the Jews, God used them to show their power. Going back early in chapter 9, it talked about how God used the Pharaoh of Egypt to show his power, to show that he had power over all things, and he used the 10 plagues as a means to sort of mock the different gods that not the Israelites, but the Egyptians were believing in, right? That they would follow. So God showed his power. God showed his power through the 40 years that they were in the wilderness. And they probably weren't supposed to be in the wilderness for 40 years. But because they were disobedient, they complained a lot, and they wanted to go back to the life of Egypt because they weren't fully trusting God. It lasted that long. And once they got into their promised land, of course, there were so many different things that happened. The destruction of the temple. They complained because they wanted to have a king, and God was supposed to be their king. So all these different things that God had shown his power to these people were supposed to be an example to the rest of the world that God existed. Yet they fell into the world and became one of the many people who decided to follow after other idols or worship other idols in the sort. So God decided and said, because of this, now it's going to be going to the Gentiles who will become the witnesses to the world, to even the Israelites, to the Jews. So let's continue. Verse 27. Isaiah also cries out concerning Israel. Though the number of the children of Israel be as the sand of the sea, and you can count how many grains of sand there are in the sea, a lot, right? The remnant will be saved. There's just going to be a very small portion that will be saved. And of course, if you read the book of Revelation, you will know that there is a portion that will be saved there. There was a portion that was saved in the Babylonian captivity. There was also a remnant that was saved after that too. So if you go back through the history of the Jews, there was also a remnant that happened that was saved from the Holocaust back in 1945. Well, the 1939 to 1945, and 1948 was when Israel got their land back. But so there's always a remnant that's going to be saved. Verse 28, for he will finish the work and cut it short in righteousness, because the Lord will make a short work upon the earth. And for us, it seems like it's a really long time before we get to the 1,000-year reign that Christ is going to be here on the earth. But for him, 1,000 years is just like a day. So it's going to be a short work upon the earth. We just have to be patient. The people, he's saying there's going to be a work that God is going to finish. But at the same time, he's still going to show and prove to Jews that he is still God, that God is still God. Verse 29, and as I said before, unless the Lord of the Sabaoth, which translate also as the Lord of hosts, and if you know about what the Lord of hosts means, it's basically like the king of an army, right? So the Lord of hosts, the host is like a multitude, a huge army. Okay, unless the Lord of Sabaoth had left us a seed, we would have become like Sodom, and we would have been made like Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah was burnt to the ground. It's no longer in existence, and that could have happened to the Jews, but it hasn't, because God is still using them, as well as he's using the Gentiles in order to show that God is real. Verse 30, what shall we say then? That Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness have attained to righteousness, even the righteousness of faith? But Israel, pursuing the law of righteousness, has not attained to the law of righteousness. The law talking about the 10 Commandments and the other 613 laws that they followed in order to be righteous. And the Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness, they weren't following this law, but they attained righteousness. And how did they attain righteousness? How did we as Gentiles attain righteousness? It's through Jesus, through believing that he died and he rose again for us, right? Now, the Jews were supposed to know based on the prophecies that were given, and as well as the law that pointed to Jesus. They should have seen Jesus arriving into Jerusalem on that donkey. And if you study about it, you know that that's the reason why the temple was torn down in 70 AD, because they did not recognize Jesus coming. Let's continue. Verse 32, why? Because they did not seek it by faith. They were just basically blindly following the law, but as it were, by the works of the law. Basically just doing all those different things in order to show that they were righteous, right? So if we go back to Jesus' days when he was around, and he would rebuke the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, because they were basically just following the law to look as if they were righteous, and people hailed them as being righteous because they were following the law. But that's not what God wanted. God wanted the heart to be following after him. So, continuing, for they stumbled at the stumbling stone. Verse 33, as it is written, behold, I lay in Zion a stumbling stone and a rock of offense, and whoever believes on him will not be put to shame. So basically, Jesus is that stumbling stone, and was a proof, or was a way to prove that it is feeble to have this perceived, what's my word there? Perceived conception of what righteousness is. Because we tend to want to do good and be good and do all the holy things, to be separate and different from everybody else, but we miss the fact that it is through God's righteousness that we are righteous. And it is offensive to those who are following all these different laws that there is this one man, that they oversaw who Jesus is and who Jesus was when Jesus came. So we'll leave it at that for now. We will continue in chapter 10 next time. Y'all be blessed.